Good practice. Thank you. Good afternoon. Welcome. It's June 13th, 2023. This is a special called meeting of the McMinnville Water and Light Commission. I will ask our clerk to do a roll call, please.
Yes, Mayor Dropkin,
Here.
Commissioner Tankersley,
Here.
Commissioner Gormley,
Here.
Commissioner Christensen,
Here.
and Commissioner Tate.
Here. Thank you. And I will hand this over to Andres from DDS to do an introduction and talk about our next steps today.
Great, thank you, Mayor. Wait for Trina to share the screen here. Good to see you all. It's been a little bit since we've been back, although we did have a virtual setting for the strategic plan. Today is the official kind of kickoff of the next iteration of the work that we are doing around this kind of joint framework between the city of McMinnville and Water and Light. And today we are going to be focused on a couple of different elements of that. We're going to be doing a similar session later with the city council. Today we're going to just go over a few ground rules, some process and intended outcomes. Really going to spend the majority of our time doing two things. One is we want to report back to you some of the themes that we heard in a lot of our one-on-one conversations. I checked in with you all, had very good conversations. Thank you for that. My colleague Brian Scott, who I'll introduce here in a second, did the same with the city council, and we want to bring forward those themes. I will note that you received a memo articulating some of those themes, so these should feel familiar. And then we're going to have a discussion around those, allow you to kind of react and talk to each other about that. And then we'll have a broader discussion, which Brian will lead around kind of some kind of strategic questions to consider. So pretty robust agenda today. Again, you know me, you know Jacqueline, we've been here with you in the strategic plan process. Brian joined us at the beginning. He hasn't been here for a while, so I just want to turn it over to him quickly for him to do some introductions before we turn it over to the mayor. Yeah.
Okay, all right. So I'm Brian Scott with BDS Planning and Founding Partners. Glad to be here with you all today. You want me to do something else?
No, it's Ryan was at the kickoff and then kind of saved all his energy to come back here today to do the best. Let us know. So Trina, why don't you go to the next slide? I want to turn it over to the mayor for some opening remarks.
Thank you. Well, thank you all for being here today. I really appreciate it. You know, this effort is our next step in realigning the two organizations of the city of McMinnville and McMinnville Water and Light, which have worked hand in hand essentially since existence, and for whatever number of reasons over the last many years have had conflict. And so in resolving conflict, we might have to have some hard or uncomfortable conversations. And I think that's a perfectly fine thing as long as we approach them with the idea that we are trying to come to a place of understanding. What the intention of this is not is it is not a forum to work out past conflict or try to rehash things that have come up between the two organizations. The idea is to focus on the big picture of how the organizations work hand in hand, are supportive, and are serving the community at large. And so that is my intended outcome. And thank you for all of the additional time. I know this is an extra ask on top of a lot of asks. And so I just want to say that I appreciate that time. I am very happy with the process we've gone through so far, and forever hopeful. So I always have that going for me. And I just hope that you will be open to the process today. I don't know if anybody had a chance to look over their charter in advance of this. I did have a conversation earlier today. I understand not everybody reads it before going to bed every night, but you know, I'll make some allowances there. But that part of the portion as well. I also do want to say this is not the beginning or an opportunity to open up the charter. But our work with the charter is to review the instruction manual that we were all given and make sure that we're familiar with what's in it. And that's all I have to say today. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. Trina, why don't you go to the next slide? We're going to go over some kind of ground rules and meeting expectations. Brian's going to take us through that.
So, as the mayor said, some of this may be awkward and it may be challenging, so good to start out with some ground rules of sort of how we're going to behave if that comes up. So we want everyone to participate fully. You're all members of the commission. You're here for a reason. You've got good things to participate, to offer. So we want everyone to participate. Please try to avoid interrupting each other and let everybody have their say. Make space for others to speak, the folks that are very used to talking. Make sure you allow some space for people that are a little quieter to speak. Try to remember to speak from your own personal experience and try and avoid overgeneralizing. Therapists like to say, use I statements, make it about yourself, not using somebody else. Please accept hands-on facilitation from Andres and I if we feel like we need to move you. If you're stuck on a point, we'll try to be pretty light with that. But if we need, let's move on, please accept that. Assume good intentions from everybody, both today and in the meeting we'll have with the city council tomorrow. But also understand the difference between intent and impact. Sometimes you have good intention, but what you said still hurt. So, try to recognize that. And we're gonna hope everybody goes into this with a spirit of consensus and compromise, so that you can all progress forward. You and the council can progress forward together for the benefit of the citizens of McMinnville. That all seem reasonable. Great.
Next slide, Trina. So a lot of this should feel familiar when we meet later with the council. They haven't been as engaged in they haven't been engaged in our strategic planning kind of framework. So we're going to do a little bit of introduction as to why this issue came up as part of the strategic plan and the work that we did. But just in case you're not living and breathing the strategic plan like we are, just to quickly articulate the process and why we are here and kind of how we got here in terms of building off of the strategic plan. So Trina, why don't you go to the next slide? So our intended outcome in this process is to develop or to end up in a joint framework that clarifies roles and responsibilities. I'm trying to move the screen here. Sorry, 1 second. So
Why don't you go to just the one?
the one,
Yeah.
There you go.
There you go.
thank you. Joint framework that clarifies roles and responsibilities of the council, of the commission, and of their members, as well as a strengthened mutual relationship. At the very kind of general level, there's a lot of things that will come under that, but if we are successful, that is what we will result in. That so hopefully we'll talk about, if folks have questions or comments in a second. Just to reiterate what the mayor said in the ground rules Brian just talked about, we don't think that this is we know this is not a process for a review of staff performance. And the reason is because in our assessment, you'll see in the key takeaways, it's clear to us that the issue of relationship isn't between the staff, it's kind of amongst the leadership. So we really want to focus and hone in on that. So this isn't a space or a substitute for a kind of professional review or performance review of staff. And it's not really a forum for accusations that take us kind of backwards. We can very easily spend this time kind of swirling on things that went wrong. We want to be able to kind of recognize some of that, but we want to be able to do that in the spirit of moving forward so that we could actually achieve our intended outcome.
We spent a fair amount of time debating how to word that. We know that you're going to need to talk about some of the problems that have been there, and that's fine. We should do that. But if that's all we do, it won't have been worth everybody's time. So we need to talk about issues, but we're here to move forward.
Yeah. In that spirit, Trina, can you move forward? Thanks. So these are very familiar to you. Trina, you can go to the next slide. These are the 4 categories that we, strategic priority categories that we talked about in the strategic relationships. We talked about developing a framework between water and light in the city that focuses on clear responsibilities, roles and responsibilities, opportunities for collaboration on behalf of all citizens of McMinnville. So we are taking that and adding a little bit of wording to our intended impact. But that is what we're hoping to accomplish. Let me pause there and see if there's any kind of questions. Does that sound like what you're here to do in the process that you're engaging?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So what is the process of how we're going to get there? And so we had one-on-one conversations with council members, commissioners, and with staff throughout this process. Today, can I go to the next slide? We're in the commission meeting. Oh, yeah. Later today, we're going to go into a council meeting and have a similar conversation with the city council. Tomorrow, we have a joint session, which is a longer joint session with both the commission and the council, that we will also take what we hear from the meetings today and incorporate that into the agenda and presentation to be able to kind of have a fruitful conversation. And then we will follow up with some additional one-on-one, similar to me reaching out to you and Brian reaching out to the council members, and then to use that interaction information to develop a framework of recommendations. But any questions on the process? Okay. So charter review, we wanted to make sure that we started the conversation with you all, and having a conversation and a little review around the language in the charter. And this is not the entirety of the charter, but this is kind of a key area of the charter. Some of it's kind of more organizational. So I'm going to actually read this and see if you have any questions or interactions. In addition to the mayor, there shall be 4 members appointed by the mayor for a 4-year term. The mayor, with consent of council, may remove any member for cause. 3 members of the commission necessary for quorum. Commission have charge of water works and lighting plants of the city. And the commission has power to conduct and manage the business delegated to the commission, establish rates, provide and shut off water and electric energy, make any regulations necessary and convenient to conduct business. So there's more around that, but that's the core charge as listed in the charter. And we focused on this piece because I think in our interactions, especially with some of the city council members, there's maybe not a lot of awareness around this. And so we're going to spend some time later today really kind of digging into that. But, I think there's some elements here that around how you are frankly kind of right now operating that maybe, eventually we need to talk about kind of, is that what makes sense for the commission moving forward? So let me pause there. Hopefully this isn't the first time you're seeing this and reading this. But any kind of reactions, questions around what's listed on the screen? Yeah, Tom.
Yeah, could you briefly go through what you've left out here? I recall, and again, I may be wrong, but I recall there was a section of the charter that said that the funds are kept separate. Is that, and did you leave that on purpose or why?
No, it's a good catch. Maybe we need to expand it in the established rate section at the bottom, but no, that wasn't intentional. But we try to boil it down to one slide, but yeah.
And what else did you leave out?
We didn't leave out kind of much more, I think, of significance. We think there's some other elements that are more procedural, but we think that this is around membership and really the main core duties of the commission that we wanted to focus on. But certainly if there are other things that we want that are important to you to show on the slide, we should do that.
I think it would be useful to have the slide, but then also to have everybody get a copy of, I think it's one section of the charter, right?
Yeah.
Especially for the council, but for us too. So if you could do that, I would really appreciate it.
Okay. Yeah. Ed.
If you'd also add the section about the appointment and the confirmation, and if the board elects a chair and the mayor is here ex officio.
Mhm.
I'm really surprised at the statement, the mayor, with consent of council, may remove any member for cause. I'm surprised. I mean, I know it's in the charter. I'm not saying, it's just, I'm sitting here and looking at that thing, there's a line been drawn in the sand immediately. That line, that statement draws a line in the sand. That's a little disheartening. For what it's worth.
Is your comment that it's in that that we've included it on the slide or that it's in the charter?
No, it's on the slide.
Okay,
But if it's part of the charter. And what is your hesitation having it represented here?
Well, there's lots of things in the charters. It's like, that's an interesting statement to come for us based on how the mayor, opened the meeting. That I'm aware of us having went before the council and the council not being happy with presentation. And it's just, are we getting set up that, we've annoyed some people and therefore we're history. That's what that says.
Well, maybe I could step in here real quick for a couple of things. One, if we're gonna alter this to bring it back to mention the fund keeping, then the charter goes on to, it states not only that the Water and Light Commission shall keep an independent review of its accounting,
Mhm.
but then it also states, if for clarity, if we're trying to bring forward important elements in this slide, it also states that those books will be available to the city. And then if we're delineating how the power structure, the governance structure is laid out in the charter, it puts the mayor as the presiding officer. It puts the council president in place of the mayor in absence of the mayor. It puts the chair in place of the council president in absence of both the mayor and the council president. And then it actually calls for a pro tem chair as well, if the mayor, the council president, and the chair are all unavailable, so that the governance of the organization doesn't become interrupted by the absence of an individual. I will also say that BDS created these slides independently, so any reading into the presentation of them, I would just open up that perhaps you are reading into communication that's not happening there, because what I said at the beginning is exactly what I've communicated consistently with BDS. And so I understand how you're taking offense to that or reacting to that, but that would be insinuating that in somehow I oversaw the production of these slides, or that I had some intent that, we would not need to, if my intent was to come in here and lay some groundwork for removal of commissioners, I wouldn't need to waste the money and the time of the commission and the city to do that. So I don't interpret it in the same way. I see it as delineating these things, and I can understand or hear that it landed for you differently, but I think those are two important pieces.
let me just reiterate that there's no alternative agenda, including these words. What I would say is that when we were reviewing the charter, issues around kind of governance, I think the mayor laid out the mayor, the vice mayor, the
Council
president, the chair, the pro tem. It's fairly involved in terms of who is running the meeting, and it's not always kind of something I think that's practiced. But I think if you look at the second half of this slide, that we put that intentionally in there as a way of reminding the council that this is actually what's in the charter as well. So I think, there's no secrets here. This language is copied and pasted from the charter. Certainly, Tom, we could include the entire charter.
My sense is we should make sure everybody has the whole charter. And we should probably make this into like 2 slides, or maybe 3, that talk about how does the commission get populated and run? How, what are the duties of the water and light, and how is the money managed? Because those are kind of all have been bones. I think that would be better.
And it's a fairly short section.
Yes.
Really.
And if we're going to do that, when you talk about the keeping the funds separate, there's also, and I think it's relevant because there's a question about whether the city has the ability to charge us to do this, but the charter says that we have the power and authority for and on behalf of the city to construct, erect, maintain, rebuild, and repair and enlarge so-and-so, the water plant, and electric light plant system and system. So I think it's important that goes in too, because that really, that speaks in our mind, in my mind anyway, to a point of friction between the at least city staff.
I think that's a fair.
That's it.
Yeah.
We should make this into like 3 slides. It comes. Makes sense.
I mean, I've reviewed
Yeah.
that sentence a lot
Yeah,
in thinking
sure,
about
yeah.
this conflict.
I
Yeah.
think it's important. Yeah.
Yeah.
Other comments? So
Thank you.
good note, we will extend the slides and we'll have actual printout of the charter at this meeting and then for the commission, joint commission. Joint commission council meeting.
And if you don't have time to change that slide today, but if you could mention that to the council, please, so that they
We'll
don't.
change it.
We'll change it.
Oh, perfect. Thank you.
It's happening in real time. Most is the services of media.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Trina, do you want, can we move on to the next slide here? So the next couple sections is really, we're going to do a little bit more presentation, but really want to encourage a discussion. This first section, I'm going to read through the slide and then Brian and I will kind of weigh in as we, as I interviewed and kind of engage with you all and Brian engaged with the city council. Is that a copy of the charter? Oh, there you go.
A light reading for tonight.
Oh, will I read of the entire charter?
Yes.
Okay.
Chapter 10.
Gina, next slide. So when we met with you individually, and when we met with the council, we had some kind of pretty standard questions, but really we allowed ourselves to really go with kind of what your key interest was. And so we said, you know, what's important to you in accomplishing in this process being developing a framework of partnership or a framework of understanding between the city and the commission. What's going well, what's not going well, what are some of your what's successes and what are some of your frustrations? Oh, go back one. Yeah. And so here, these are our words in terms of our summary. So these aren't direct quotes from any one conversation that's important. Our key takeaways from the 101s is that the relationship between the two bodies is strained. And let me qualify that. Not between the staff, but between kind of the leadership in terms of kind of who has what responsibility to do certain things. Strained because there's a lack of trust and collaboration. There's a lack of understanding of roles and responsibilities. It's unclear. The staff work to get well together, as I mentioned, but the conflict seems to be between leadership. As we discussed, there's a lack of familiarity with the charter. This is more so true in some of the interactions we had with council. And the charter obviously being the section as it relates to McMinnville Water Light. And to that end, there needs to be more improved education and mutual understanding of each body. So improved education meaning there's not always a certainty of what the utility is doing or kind of what the council is doing and how it's interacting. And so there needs to be better systems put in place and better kind of regular collaboration and information sharing between both bodies to kind of stem that. So improved education and mutual understanding of each body. A clear need to call out that shifts in revenue streams require attention. It's putting some strain on the relationship. It needs to be addressed. But there's also a very clear mutual commitment to the people of McMinnville and desire for cooperation. So, I don't think anybody in our conversation is going into this with like super entrenched in their corner around they have that North Star around, we want to do what's best for the citizens of McMinnville. So we're really kind of starting from that kind of shared value. Brian, you want to add anything?
Yeah, as Andres mentioned at the top, he talked to each of you and I talked to each of the members of the council. And I had relationship with a couple of them from when the city did a strategic plan a few years ago, but I didn't know a couple of them either. And we had heard from you all as we started the strategic plan here that this issue was kind of hot. And I didn't know what was going to happen when I started, reaching out to council members. And there wasn't any doubt that it was hot. And folks were bent out of shape about the situation. So it very much paralleled, what we heard here. So that was, told us we weren't, y'all weren't crazy. There was an issue. I heard, we had one of the questions we asked, I'm sure that Andres asked you too. It's like, do we need to modify the charter? And if I had to summarize the council reaction, it was like, well, I don't know what it says, or something like that. It was even more like, I don't know. So it wasn't, and what came out to me very strongly was, I don't really understand how the organizations fit together. I don't understand the role. We've had COVID, we're all working, we've been on all these, and we don't even know each other, and it just a sense of, there was this conflict, but it was a conflict around, we aren't all like friends working together on this thing. It's like, we don't know each other. And then we have this conflict and, kind of a sense of chagrin over that, because clearly, as Andres heard from y'all, I heard from the council that, we should be working together. Great. The whole point here is to do the right thing for citizens. There was no doubt there. But a sense of it'd be great if we spent more time together and kind of understood our common purpose and how it's supposed to go together. So it felt to me like as Andres and I kept kind of talking back and forth about what are you hearing, it felt very similar, different perspective, but we were hearing the same story pretty clearly. And certainly, shifts in revenue streams is a very polite way of saying, some of the stuff that happened over the last couple of years about money was annoying to everyone. So.
So on this whole key takeaways thing, so I'm thinking, okay, so is the goal at the end of this to maybe have a couple of bullet points under each one of these items that we can work on as organizations?
Yeah, I think if we go back to we won't, don't actually go back, but I'll just, you picture the intended outcome slide. Talked about roles and responsibilities, which are then very key takeaways and kind of a clarity of who's doing what and who's not doing.
So like if I just pick, let's just lack of trust and collaboration. So what would that look like as a couple of ways to improve?
Trust can be achieved by more regular interaction with one another.
Right.
By relationship building and understanding kind of what you're doing and being kind of transparent about what you're doing. The commission and the council together and sharing information. That's how you build trust and that's how you build collaboration. You know what each other is doing. That's how you can identify opportunities for when does it make sense for us to work together? When are we in our own separate lanes? And you don't really have that now. I mean, everybody has kind of their separate understanding of what's going on.
I don't see this necessarily as a task list of
No.
actions, but rather, is this our common understanding of the current status? Do we all agree these things exist? And then from that, we're
going to develop a task list.
Right.
Yeah.
What I would imagine
That's what I was
is going to
looking
be,
Some-
actions.
Some
that-
actions under each one of these.
I don't
The
see it
next
that
thing on our
Well,
agenda.
so how would we improve this?
Oh, okay.
The next thing on our agenda, we're going to ask some questions to tee
Okay.
up some
maybe
discussion
that's-
about, it seemed to us, we won't, it's up to you and the council. But it seemed like some principles about what the relationship was supposed to be like would be a good idea, and some specific activities to address some of these points would make sense. But we want to get there. First, what we'd like to do is, does this sound like the situation? I mean, does this feel like reflective of what you all were saying?
I think it is. I think that generally, and I as you know, it was very important to me that we don't dip into conversations around staff. I will say with this point in here, what I would say is that saying staff work well together, conflict is between leadership. I would say staff would thrive if there wasn't conflict between leadership, or staff between the two organizations would have the ability to work even better together if that cohesion was happening at the leadership level.
I'm really struggling trying to understand the definitions here, or who is who. when I look at staff, I'm thinking of all the worker bees in this building. And when I think of leadership, I think of John and Sam and the accounting department and that, but
When we use the word
It's-
leadership here, we meant the commission and the council.
okay, so there was an interesting situation took place the very first meeting that Remy took over from Scott Hill, and she was really upset about the inner workings of the two staffs. And it had to do with the billing system, remember? You really were thinking that Water and Light was doing everything it could to keep success from happening on the other.
That was a
Good.
very conflict laden process,
But
including
the
between
very, it was the very first
staff.
meeting. I mean, you were really, and it was interesting to hear that because I wasn't quite aware of that. And then many meetings later, I said, are things any better? And that applied to, us dragging our feet with this collection, the whole aspect of helping collect money.
Mhm.
And so I'm kind of, the Water and Light Board really wasn't giving any direction at that. I mean, it was the two worker bees in the caves doing this stuff. And so when Remy came,
We didn't hear about this example that you're saying, that this is new information. So we heard, oh, the staff out there in the field work great together. And this
Well,
conflict
see,
at the
I-
commission council level. That's what we were told.
I don't know.
And so and more specific, even amongst the staff leadership or direct reports, it feels like the relationship is working. Certainly there are maybe times where there's some disagreements, but there's a good relationship. So it's really when we say the word leadership, we're saying the commission and the council. And that was reflected all through the strategic planning process too. Jody, I
And
saw
I-
your, you go Tom, and then you can go. Yeah,
Joe
go.
can go first, that's fine.
Well, when I read that, I think that what you're reflecting in the leadership is the policy driven and high level procedures. That's how I see it, and I think there was conflict in that. The commission had a. I don't want to talk specifically, but I would say that in a very complex process, which this organization has, we naturally, there's, water, there's light, there's all sorts of complexity there. I think the commission in that instance, if I was going to be specific, is that there was not an ability to be comfortable with the discussions that were going on because it felt like I heard this several times. We can't do that. That's not how the system is built. And that was at the commission level. That wasn't at the staff level. Those were conversations we were having. And to me, we should have been talking about policy, not process. Process to me is what the staff does, the day-to-day operations of the organization. The leadership component of the commission is about setting policy and high-level direction. It's not getting into the detail. I often think sometimes we get into a lot of detail about process. And I think where we need to be clearer is on policy. And that then gives the strength to the leadership of the organization to do what they need to do. And we're not into the detail of it, but I might be perceiving the goal or the position that I have on this commission a little bit differently.
I mean, if you're right on everything you said, we just need to pick the pieces. So time out. The information we were dealing with came to us from our attorney.
She wasn't talking about
So,
that. He was
well,
talking about the
so-
billing.
Tom, why don't you go in there?
Yeah, so. I really want to follow the rules and I really want to keep this thing moving forward, but. But I think that in the past, anyway, I don't see that right now, but I think in the past. There was conflict that involved the senior executive leadership of both agencies. And that's just not my perception. That's what I was told by the previous mayor. And I mean, if you look at well, I think there was, and I think that the Water and Light Commission, and it sort of is the other side of Jody's concern, has more involvement in policies as they're developed. Things don't just get presented to us; they get run by us, discussed, and so from our viewpoint, we don't really, well, it was surprising to us, to me anyway, say it that way, that the city executive staff presented a proposal that was a change in 100 years of the way the agencies had worked without even talking to us about it. And I think that's an executive staff issue. And I know, John, you can correct me, but I'm pretty sure they didn't talk to you either about it.
So maybe the best way to present this is that this differentiation of staff is that the challenges at the executive and
yes,
commission, council level,
right,
not the
right.
frontline staff.
Right.
That maybe that's a better way to characterize that. I think that's fair.
No, fine.
Any other comments on what's on here? Yeah, Commissioner Tate.
I think I just, as the newest member of the commission, and I know there's newer people on the council as well, and from your conversations about people just saying they really don't have clarity because they don't know a lot of things. I would say, like, when I see the first sentence, relationship between the two bodies is strained, I'm not personally connected to that really in any way, except for what I hear in meetings. Like, I don't have a relationship with anybody on the city council, nor could I tell you without, going to look, like, I can't name all the city council, members, and I don't have personal relationships with them. So I think part of it is, sort of from me coming in to start on the commission and council members coming in on the council, obviously, there's a relationship that needs to be built from the beginning of the start of a commission and a council, and that, hasn't happened. And, COVID is probably a good part of why that might have occurred, but it'd be really good to focus on those relationships as being strategic and important from the first day, right?
Your point is well taken, and that's consistent with what I heard from council members. It was like, well, it got all nasty, but it was partly because we didn't really even know each other. There's this conflict, and it wasn't like, people that we were real acquainted with. And, that, at least I heard that. So I heard that multiple times, like, we didn't have a kind of a human working relationship, and then this conflict emerged, and it was real easy to get, grumpy.
And on the conversations we had, there was some of that as well, but there was also just Commissioner Dingersley's point, kind of action that felt out of nowhere because there wasn't any kind of either relationship or briefing or anything that. And so I think as we go into the next step around, okay, John, to your point, great, what are we going to do about it, and how are we actually going to move forward in improving relationship is kind of where we get to it. Yeah.
Real quickly, I just want to agree, but I think COVID had a lot to do with it, because Remy, you were on the council the last time we came and made a presentation. It was a joint meeting, right? And Scott was mayor, and we talked about what we did, and it was a very constructive, friendly meeting, I thought.
Yeah.
Yeah, but that was before COVID, and
It
Yeah.
seemed, I would say, friendly. However, that disconnect still existed. And I think I've spoken to that a lot in our meetings about kind of the lack of, Commissioner Tate doesn't know who all of the counselors are. As I've said in here frequently, 90% of my learning about water and light has happened in the last year, and neither of those are really, those are bad things. Those are representations of how disconnected the two bodies are, and maybe kind of fine tuning that to bring your points in, it's that the relationship between the two bodies is disconnected. And so part of that disconnect is strain.
And I think part of the reason for that is that the city council is a lot more complicated job than it used to be with all the land use stuff and your budgeting and all that. And it's, and you know, running utility, as you know now, is quite complicated. And I think in the past, and Ed, you can help me if I'm wrong here, I think in the past that the council has just said, you know, just run the utility, leave us alone, pretty much. Seth?
I think, Brian, you can speak to this. In a lot of the conversations or in some of the conversations with the council, there is this sense that McMinnville is changing. It's, you know, it's not the it's kind of same city it was before the pandemic, certainly, or 10 years ago. And, you know, kind of the council's aware of that. And, you know, it's an opportunity to really kind of restructure some or kind of reconnect with one another.
But going back to Jody's point, so this is kind of a list or
Mhm.
kind of areas that we need to focus on. And out of that, we're gonna try to come up with some framework, some way that we move forward. Is that fair?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think what I think this is leading to are guiding principles of
Yeah.
how we engage and roles and responsibilities, and that this list is do we agree that these are true? And if these are true, now we can start talking about how do we work better together? How do we build systems that are repeatable? How do we have principles of engagement that have consistency to them, so that when we go back to this list in 5 years, we will have made an impact based on these guiding principles of how we do work together. That's how I see. I don't see this as the list. I see this as,
Alright.
this is, we agree, this is our current state, and the actions that we take will impact this over time.
Yeah, correct. We were just trying to reflect what we
Yeah,
heard from people
yeah.
about the situation.
Yeah.
And it needs to be something that's sustainable for when everybody here is gone and the
Yes.
next group.
Yes.
Exactly.
That's why it's in one of the conversations, it says to be about improved systems, not about improved individual kind of relationships.
Yeah,
That's
this is
gonna
not about
factor in
people,
some-
this is about
Yes.
process.
But it's gotta be around the systems. So Commissioner Christensen provided us a great segue moment. And I love a good segue moment. Trina, do you want to move to the next slide, please? Hand it over to Brian for a broader discussion.
So what we want to do, I mean, we're planning to have more or less exactly the same conversation with the city council later on this afternoon. And then we will take the product from the discussion. We'll make some edits to these slides before we show to council based on your feedback here. Probably do the same thing again after they give some feedback for the meeting tomorrow. And then we'll take the product of the conversation we're about to have. We're going to ask you 3 questions to tee up a discussion. We'll take notes here. We're going to ask the council the same questions. We'll take notes there. We will use that to, between now and the meeting tomorrow, kind of tee up some suggested actions based on what we heard from both groups as like, you know, as we listen to all of you, maybe this would make sense. And then your task tomorrow as a group will be to spend a little time talking about that last slide, which probably people need to have you need to say some stuff. So we want to do that. And then kind of go through this list and say, do those make sense, and make changes? That makes sense. And so then our sense is we'll get done tomorrow. We'll have some sort of draft product and we'll take some time to edit it. And then we'll reach out and sort of touch base and see if we can refine it into something that's useful for both organizations. That's the prize. It's nothing mysterious about it.
Is there a formality to what you may be recommending? In other words, would there be some action taken by both bodies, or is it more of here's a place to start as we explore this?
Well, the fantasy I've got going at the moment is we would get to a place that there would be something like guiding principles or relationship principles or something that you would both kind of, you know, adopt, and it would become something that would be, you know, there in the notebook of stuff you get when you're on the city council or the commission that says this is how we work together. And that there would be a set of activities that are going to happen in the next couple of years to help remedy some of those problems, like some physical get-togethers, you know, and some discussions.
But I also see things like when you talk about educating. I mean, in my mind, that tells me that council members should come over here and actually meet with staff or some somebody on some type of, when they first start maybe, so that they get some type of education about what we do here.
It's the same onboarding that you gave me.
Yes,
I got to see a big thing of wire and you told me where it went,
Yeah.
what it was, and yeah, so I think that those kind of actions could.
Yes,
What I would
exactly.
what I would love to see, if I could join on your dream, is that we have also in that project-based work, so that we begin to understand water and light and infrastructure in the city of McMinnville should go hand in hand,
Right.
and that we're not thinking about them as separate, but they're coordinated. And to me, I think that kind of action where we build that in, not only an understanding, but a practical use beyond just commission to council relationship, but that's to me the true north, right? That we're building out systems that benefit all. Yeah,
Jody,
but I don't know if that's
no,
for
no,
here.
when you talk about that, are you talking about knowledge or changing the way our staffs interact at the line level?
I'm not sure.
Okay.
I'm
So
not
I
sure.
think you're drifting into the conversation. And let me ask my questions before you answer them.
I'm always jumping ahead.
No, you're exactly where I want to go. So Trina, can we go to the next slide, please? So discussion, this is why I want this guy. I'm gonna ask 3 questions and we can talk about them all at the same time because they're all intermet. So one question would be, what principles might guide the city utility relationship going forward? So I'd love to hear some thoughts about what those principles might be like. And then what does the commission need from the council for a successful working relationship? And then the obvious third question is, what can the commission do? This should say commission, editing error there. What can the commission do to support a successful working relationship? So I just kind of want to ask all those, and we're going to take notes, and you started to offer some
So
of the
the
answers.
city utility, that's not council to commission. That's talking about the services of the city and the services of the utility. How does that work?
I'm open to whatever you think will be most useful to remedy
That's
the
my problem.
situation we're in.
Okay,
So what principles would be a logical thing for you all to have as kind of a North Star as you're recognizing how you're supposed to work with the city?
I think though, what you already called out, the existing shared value, which is that the work should be focused on what's best for the citizens of McMinnville.
Yes.
and I think in that, the one thing that we ground all of our decisions in from the commission standpoint is not in the moment, not in 25 years, it's 100-year vision. And I think sharing that perspective with the council probably isn't new, because they're thinking about very big long-term projects, but I think that helps them understand how we think about as a commission. Our guide, that's one of our guiding principles, and I don't think that should change. For
So a
this.
thing you need from council is to understand the long-term nature
Yes,
of your vision and your business.
yes,
And that's what I wanted to talk about too. And I think it's important that we explain why. It's not just that's the way utilities do things, but we have to plan ahead and give some examples like the water system, or planning ahead for oversight, the electrical and you know, and all these things. But also, I think we need to recognize that the city has necessarily has a shorter term horizon. And we need to figure out a way that we can run the utility the long-term horizon and not get in their way if it doesn't interfere with us running utility properly.
So the thing the commission can do is understand the day-to-day nature of the city's operations.
Well, or I think it's bigger than that. It's just the
well, the 20,
horizon.
so a city's thinking in 20-year horizons. You know, that's how the planning process works, but I think there's a lot of opportunity to, even though our markers 100 years, I think understanding what a 20-year planning horizon is and how we fit into that, I think there could be some real value in exploring what our planning horizons are. And not the regulatory so much, but just sort of how thinking happens. And around that planning piece, because that. You're all gonna be a part of it.
So as I think about what Jody said. I think one problem that we had in the friction was. That the city needed the city services fee yesterday. And we needed to bill it for them, and that's, that's when we can help them do that. But I think at some level, we were frustrated by them pushing to solve things that had to be. Our billing system had to work when this was done. We couldn't have a disruption. We thought about, Portland and their water system, their water bureau, they put in a billing system and it couldn't work. So we were thinking about that. And the city was thinking they wanted their money right away. So I think if we had had this conversation before, might have been better. In other words, so if we had understood better and just said, well, that's just, they just, they're stressed by this and that's okay, rather than they're trying to get us to do something that's going to screw up our system.
So regular communication of emerging needs.
Well,
would
but
be-
also, but a big picture understanding that the utility, to be a successful utility, has to have a long-term horizon and think things through and do things. And you can't just, sometimes we have to do it, like, wires down or something, but it, that we have a longer term horizon than they do. And if they need us to do something,
You need to
it
give
may
them
not be able to
something.
get done in the time they want. Or if we seem to have money now, but we know we're gonna need it later. So where they have, and we have to understand that they have pressures and needs for money right now.
So what I'm hearing you say, though, is it would have been helpful if you'd seen that coming. And you got kind of blindsided by it. Is that not?
No, I don't think that's true. Because, they were talking, they talked to us about billing for quite a while, I think.
Yeah, but it was, the time frame was.
Well, and the other problem was that. It took a while for them to decide what they wanted. And we had to know that before we could talk to our vendor about the change of the billings. And then once they decided. The impression from this end was that we weren't moving fast enough.
But I think the root of that is not understanding the system.
Right.
And so
Right, no, yes,
I-
correct.
I think we got way down the road before the first meeting should have been, how does your system work? Here's what we want to do, right? There needed to be sort of context setting. But I think when we talk about principles, we're not talking about a specific moment, but rather how we want to work together in the future.
So I think I have something that solves for both of those, because I think that what you're bringing up is actually more deeply rooted than how you paraphrased it. And I think it does go to a guiding principle, which is that the two policymaking bodies need to understand the financial structure of the other body and to have a holistic view of the implications. And so that it leads to some more
Yes.
of that predictability,
Yeah.
right? So,
Yes,
because those conversations never happen, right? And there's a demand on the city. This body is not called upon to explain itself financially regularly. It's called upon to happen in this room, and occasionally a constituent will show up and ask for a deeper dive. But the city finances are asked to be scrutinized regularly, and it's very hard sometimes to always give the financial perspective that helps people understand kind of the arc of what happened with city finances, especially since 2000, that have really impacted. And I think that had that understanding been more in depth by both the council and the commission, My guess is that there's, I don't talk to many people that really understand all of the limitations and influences on the city budget. And I think that as part of this conversation is important, as long as it's going in both directions of what you were saying. We've got 100-year planning horizon here at the commission. We need to be fiscal stewards that to be able to achieve those goals. And the city with its much shorter planning horizon also needs to be able to make sure the commission understands what its limitations are, which are vast and have to do with things like population growth. We crossed 25,000 people 20 years ago. We no longer had access to funding streams. USD rural is off the table. So there's some nuanced things that I think might be beneficial. I want to repeat at this point.
Yeah, and I think that that the question about whether the city can tap water and light funds impacts how deep that understanding has to be, right? Don't you?
I think that kind of gets into like trying to solve a specific as opposed to part of the problem is a lack of understanding about the two financial systems.
Yes, okay, yeah.
And,
I'm having a reflection of Scott being here, very concerned that the council had, I mean, this is just a driver about stuff, but that they had been assured by upper leadership the budget was fine, and then it wasn't. And that kind of drove a bunch of this stuff. I remember he was really beside himself over that. How do we solve it? I mean,
I would say the budget hasn't been fine since property taxes were frozen with only a 3% increase. Basically, our household income hasn't improved,
he in particular talked about what had been portrayed to the council in the end was wrong. And it's everything up, in the air. So, which then goes to further applying the funds quickly.
But there's nothing the commission can do about that, I know.
No, I mean, and
Other than agreeing to the
he gave us the background. That's what it was about. I mean,
so does that lead to a suggestion about what you need from the city or a principal?
no, it was such a sad time, and I mentioned this to Remy. I mean that the emotion of having no money to run the place. What are we going to do? And it's like being at home and breaking the piggy banks, trying to find the last bit of pennies to, and there were ideas that came up that nobody would have ever thought about
Right.
5 or 10 years earlier, but it was the desperateness of the situation at the time. It was terrible.
Other thoughts on what you need from the city or what you can do to make the relationship work better, or principles that you ought to operate on?
Our list is very short. That's not good.
Or it's incredibly good.
Yeah, there's no extra credit for a really long list, but you said is in terms of principles, you've said, what's best for the citizens, a mutual and historic holistic understanding of one another, particularly financial systems. Do you want something about clear communication or transparency, or
Maybe an understanding of the long-term needs. That the commission is going to have to deal with.
And the city.
And the city, yes, and the city.
So if we have an understanding of those, and we can find common ground there through that process.
I'm just thinking aloud here.
Excuse me, what I meant to say was the long-term needs that each body has to deal with. It's not that this is what we want, or it's that we have
certain ones and
certain things that we have to deal with.
So does the city council still do goal setting?
And we have an operating agreement.
But
As
you
well.
went through a period you didn't have that, correct?
It was difficult to get everybody to sign on, so I took a different approach this year to make sure every counselor felt that they were producing an operating agreement with other members of the body that they could sign on to. But the operating agreement, I think, is a wonderful document, but it then does require all the individuals to act in accordance with it. And
But you were instrumental in making that happen, but you were going several years without having that.
we had a kind of rubber stamped operating agreement that didn't have any impact. It wasn't really being worked. It was like, hey, you're here,
Piece of paper signature.
sign this. Yeah, so we made it,
No, I mean,
it brought it back into reality. Yes.
you are responsible. I mean, get everybody back to the boat, so to speak.
Yeah.
It's just, they're just. It's such different worlds. We are a service organization that takes a raw product, converts it to a consumable product. We take bulk electricity and distribute it. And we do that for a price and a margin, and our revenue is totally driven by the margin. Our operating abilities are driven by the margins we achieve in the product we sell. For city is so dependent upon tax revenue. It's two different worlds. And the angst
Okay,
with
tax
property
rate
taxes
statement.
going up on and on stuff.
But I think if we believe that we're both here to do something that has an impact and a positive impact for this community, as we reach 35,000, as we move to 42,000, right? We know that's on the horizon. How do we become equal partners in that? So will we have flex up and down on finances? Yes. Will we have more challenging years than others? Yes. And that'll be an ebb and flow. So the idea is, how do we bring these two entities together and acknowledge that we have to work together to make big things happen? And I'll give you an example. If Water and Light Commission and the City Council were not on the same page about the work that's going to be starting on 3rd Street, the planning process, if we weren't as a commission aware of and engaged in that, we're not serving the citizens of this community. And if the city says, we don't need Water and Light at the table because we're going to put the plan and we're just going to tell you what y'all need to do, we're not doing the best thing for the citizens. So the idea is, how do we figure out a different way of working? Because we're going to have some really big opportunities to transform our community. So that's the kind of work that I'm thinking of. And I think we had a chaotic and sort of what I would consider an emergency scenario when the service fee happened. But what it did is it unearthed our ability to say, wait a minute, we don't even know who we are, each other, our work and how we work together. So to me, that's an opportunity to say, now, how can we learn from that and tackle the next big thing? Because that's not going to be the last emergency thing we deal with. It's not going to be, this isn't easy work. This is complicated. And so the idea here is, how do we understand how we serve? The city serves the community. This utility serves the community. That's our sort of body of work. And then how do we, as policy leaders, as the commission and the council, how do we become more aware of each other's roles and support each other? That's the work that I think we're trying to get to. And I think the service fee unearthed that opportunity. We're not going to be able to, and I think using terms like, and I understand our hearts are with the city and some of the challenges they face. but I don't think that they're disadvantaged. And I don't think they're under, that the council isn't thinking about this in a very strategic way. I don't see them as deficient. I see them as powering through and addressing a challenging time. And isn't that who we want as a partner? Yes, because we're going to be dealing with the same thing. So I don't see them as, you know, I use words like they're becoming, their leadership skills will be better because they've gone through this. They're figuring their way out. They're making big decisions. And we as a commission should support that. And we should be positive in our support. And that's what I'm hoping happen. I don't mean to be, you know, sort of on a pet, you know, kind of preaching, but that's what I'm hoping we're getting to.
Clearly, you're seeking a mutual understanding of each other's needs and what you're up against. It occurs to me, just thinking aloud, that, you know, it seemed like there ought to be an annual, at least, sort of get together of the council and the commission. And it would seem like a real logical activity at that might be, you know, the city manager and the general manager, you know, kind of giving this is what we're up against in the next year kind of presentation or something at that, and then everybody talking about it together. So, you know, maybe you see that, you know, the city's got a fiscal jam that's coming this way, or, you know, they hear that you got to do this, you know, big construction project that's going to make a mess or something like that. I'm just thinking that might be a real logical thing. So people, you kind of understand.
So,
Tom and then the
so
mayor.
Judy, I agree with a lot of things you say. One thing I wasn't sure if you were saying that we should both try to do the same thing. What I think of is we have the same goals, which is to benefit the citizens, but I think the taxing body, the elected city council, has one set of abilities and responsibilities, and we as public power have another set of abilities. And we certainly can work together where we you know, bill for the city, or we work with the city, which I think is my understanding, staff has really always done that. Work with the city about when you're putting infrastructure in, if the city's going to tear up a street, then if we're going to need to do it in the next 10 years, we'll do it then. Just sort of those kind of things. Working with the planning department about, you know, our requirements in subdivisions. I think we need to do that because we can do the same thing. But I think that as public power, we have sort of a separate ability. If we do our job right here, we have the ability to, you know, to lower the cost of living in McMinnville of housing by keeping people's power rates down and water rates down.
Yeah.
We have the ability to make it a more livable community by having ample water. We have an ability to help McMinnville be a better partner for our neighboring cities by carefully, you know, selling limited amounts of water to those cities. So I think those are things that we shouldn't expect the city to do. And the city, I would hope, would understand that our contribution to, say, making it affordable to live here or making it a livable city is different than something they can do. But it is a real contribution, even though it's not the way they might do it.
No, I didn't imply that they would do this work. I guess what I was trying to say is that our goals are the same: affordable, livable community, right? But our role is here and the city's role is here. But we should understand what those roles are. We should understand where the big projects are happening and where we need to be engaged on those.
Right.
So that's what I'm saying.
Okay,
Yeah.
I agree.
Mayor?
Another guiding principle I would say is that the working relationship, I don't know quite how to phrase this, wordsmith it, but the emergency preparedness and mutual emergency preparedness should be one of our guiding principles.
That makes sense.
Mhm.
Ed, and then I want to hear what Commissioner Dave.
There's still another factor that I concern myself about that, and that is, if you do. What are the risks Water and Light faces as an organization? Going forward and stuff, and it's, having adequate capital, praying that we never have an earthquake, pray that Bonneville's not taken over by the federal government, on and on and stuff, but the city, they're at risk every time they go to the ballot, trying to get something passed. They're also at risk that there could become a faction within the community that's had it. And I worry about that.
What do you mean? I don't understand.
Well, someone thinks our taxes have gotten way out of whack. And they start a movement that they're going to take over city council.
But-
That's one of the risks in my mind that I see that are.
But I think what you add to the conversation is you have experience on the city council and a long history being mayor, and you also sit on this commission. So you're speaking with a full perspective of both of those organizations. How do we impact that as a commission?
I can answer that. An example. 20 years ago, when the city decided that they would put the sewer system on a fiscally responsible pathway to improve it and pay for it, they had a very large sewer rate increase. And the mayor came to us and said, people are going to see a big increase in utility bills. Is it possible for Water and Light to put off this year's increases in electric and water and then phase them over the next 3 years? And we said yes. So at that time, the commission thought that it was helping the city with the kind of things that you two were talking about.
But that to me is a direct response to the ability of the commission to do that. A group uprising of some sort, that's not something that we as a commission can impact, right?
But we can make it less apt to happen, I think.
I guess I say the plateau we live on, we're appointed, that's our risk. But pretty much this business, it's a business and it runs along. But there's so many risks the poor city council has. And I'll give the school board elections this year as an example. A lot of people upset about education, a whole bunch of people ran. I mean, over the years, watched a lot of things happen that got people upset, and and one of the ballots we got turned down because there was a whole bunch of angst over it and stuff. But anyway, it's just we have a different world to live with.
I still think that roots into this historical perspective, and that if we're continuing to tell our stories and understand not only those planning horizons, but what would go along with that would be that as that storytelling continues, we don't lose things, because there are, you can pull up a front page news register of Kent Taylor saying you guys are going to run out of money in 2020, or by 2020, essentially. That this is predictable. And so that, but that lack of storytelling, hey, what does this failed UGB mean for the city? Well, it means we're going to run out of buildable lands in 20 years. And what's going to happen when that happens? And, so that type of continued meeting and storytelling will allow us to not get to those places, because it won't seem so, it won't seem as though all of a sudden there's an emergency reaction to a non-emergency situation. Hey, you guys don't have a sustainable funding model anymore. Here's all the factors that have contributed to that. We need to do long-term planning to make sure that we don't have to do something reaction. We don't need to do this reaction, that we don't need to stop doing the services we offer. We don't need a 20-year hiring freeze at the police department, because you won't be budgetarily prepared to then pay for that when you start bringing those officers back online. Those conversations are all what have kind of somehow been left out between these bodies. And, one of these bodies changes more than it ever changed before. So there's a lot of education that needs to happen, but that education does need to go both ways. You need to know the UGB, the, property tax reform, the PERS impacts, all of those things that stress and limit the budget. You know, you need to know that we haven't passed an operating levy since 2008. So, you know, I mean, those things are important if we're going to work together. So it doesn't just seem more like, what was it you said earlier, Tom? It's not needs as in what we want to do.
Right.
It's that these are obstacles in order to maintain our service levels and not drop our service levels.
So there's an understanding of risks and obstacles or something like that, that would be, for Commissioner Tate.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
So I think to build on that, just really that having knowledge, that's, you know, in front of everybody, that can be a reference, a piece of, you know, a reference piece of material. I think when we're talking about, you know, everybody who joins the council or joins the commission knowing about the charter, I also feel like, and we talked about knowing each other's budgets, but what I really think part of that sort of institutional document that each party needs to have is there's these new people cycling in. And I think that if we have 100-year plan, we have a budget that we're building and working on, creating our margins, making decisions based on, we know over 100 years, we have to have this much money in the bank. We have to be able to do this many things. We have to be able to do this many projects, and that those pots of money are, you know, what we're working with to try to make sure that we have sustainable electrical and water system for 100 years. But if you're working in a moment of you know, a 20-year plan and a 1-year crisis, you can easily say like, well, that's 90 years from now. So we'll just, you know, let's just look at that money as a way to help us. So somehow those two entities, you know, these two entities need to be able to understand the financial sort of goals and performance of each organization, and, you know, where the risks are and what they're doing, so that when they're looking at how do we spend, it's all the community's money, right? It's like, it's money for the entire city of McMinnville, regardless of where it is. And we have to decide as a group, because that's what we're tasked with, like, how can we best serve the community with the finances that we have available, right?
Except I think, and again, I know there are those in the city that disagree, and maybe here on the commission, but I think that the voters have told us that we cannot spend our money, but the ratepayers' money on general fund matters. And I think that we can't, there are limits to what we can do. And I think there's a good reason for that, because there will always be something worthwhile to spend money on, and you will end up like an IOU where the other utility, the investor utilities, where you don't take care of things.
So
I just think that needs to be
Yeah.
very clear in the
Yes.
conversation about pots of money and
Yeah.
plans for money and where money resides and
Yes.
why it's there,
Yeah,
right?
I agree. Yes, completely.
and I think that also the council, you know, we talk about risks on the council side, but there's an enormous risk on the water and light side. And that is our BPA contract has something called a cost recovery adjustment clause. They can increase our rates almost immediately to our customers. So when people see, well, gosh, water and light has all this money, that can disappear very quickly. And that happened in 2001. And I know Tom and Ed were around, and I was around when that happened, and it was a very scary time. Yeah, I mean, I was at a utility and we went from had a rate increase, one year rate increase one time was 88%. And so those risks are on the electric side as well. And that's one of the reasons that the electric carries the reserves it does, is because that way we can mitigate those kind of risks.
We phased it in. That's what
Yes,
we did.
exactly. And the same with the water side too.
Those are very clear things to have documented.
Yeah.
And, you know, as part of the scope of work of water and light and, you know, possible. I mean, it's just a common thing that I think
We think about
anybody
it,
who's looking at the budget should have a lot of awareness around,
but
right?
you know, we think about those things all the time, the staff, and making sure, but I'm not sure people understand why it's like that.
Right.
And I think that's
So
something.
why?
Yeah, what we need to do to educate people, right? There is this enormous risk that is out there that we have taken on with our BPA contracts, because prior to that, BPA took that risk. And when these things happened, they moved all of that over to the utilities.
So maybe the idea is that a guiding principle is we understand the risks of both bodies.
Yeah.
And we understand the financial planning of both bodies. My concern with all of this is it feels like we're creating a lot of work for both entities. That this is going to be, now we need you to jump into the water and light side and take a deep dive into and let's be honest, retention of information is not, you know, so to think about how you might create that for us.
Just my sense of operating, organizations, the way it's, the risk the downside you just highlighted is certainly real. The way you mitigate it is you say, once or twice a year, we're going to get together, we're going to do a briefing. And so we get an hour or we get 2 hours, and that's how much time you have to, you have to concentrate on learning about the city for that much
Yeah,
time, and they have to do the same, and then,
Yeah.
and then when it hits the fan, 6 months later, at least you had that briefing.
Yeah, well, and the other way is just through just much more regular reports. I mean, at council meetings, department heads give reports at the end of every, so it's just that. Is there anything exceptional coming up? Anything we need to plan on? I've asked John to provide me every other council meeting with a report that I can read in. And maybe it would be useful for you to present to council regularly as a, this is what's going on at Water and Light, and it's 5 minutes of, of update, and that keeps that body informed. That doesn't necessarily keep this body informed on the flip side. So I'm not sure the function on that, because we don't have a similar function, but that just the regular relation, as opposed to now we need you to add 6 more meetings, and I need you to go to this training,
Right.
and we're
Yeah,
gonna sit down and
I
do a
need to
charter
talk to
review
somebody.
every 18 months, It's just, this is what's happening. These are the things you should be aware of. Here's here's a BPA distribution clause, and this is what's happened, but also please contextually understand that this doesn't mean that we've had a windfall, because here are these other things. And I think that would be effective as well.
And I think having something that a resource that you could go to, because there's a lot of these.
Definition.
Yeah, or just, information, so that when you do get into a situation where you're having a meeting on a specific topic, there's data that can be brought forward that's already been shared between the two groups and has a shared understanding already. So you're starting with some, you're starting at a foundation where everybody has the same information, has had an opportunity to see it at some point, and then you build on that. So it's not, I'm not going to retain all of the things that I learned about the city, but I would like to have a resource when something comes up at the city where I could go look up something. And a lot of that probably exists already. Maybe it's just not in a defined place, right?
Well, and I think we've talked about onboarding commissioners, and to me, that body of work could be something that could be pivoted. And there was probably some council education as they come on board. Maybe that's a sort of place to start. Is there already some existing documentation that could be shared? And then I do think regular, an hour every quarter or some, to get together. But to me, the word that I'm stuck on is working relationship, and that doesn't happen in 1 hour. 1 hour bites a quarter, right? That to me feels like that's the word that we need to be focused on. Understanding certainly could occur then, but how do we build the relationship so that when the moment isn't defined, but someone says, you know what, I really need to pick up the phone and call. Because this feels like this could get ahead of us if I'm not thoughtful about bringing that for, that kind of.
My guess is that if you now and then, a couple times a year, not something ridiculous, got together and had a briefing on what was coming up and had a conversation about it, that you would get to know each other a little bit. And then when something weird happened, you know, when you were at a commission meeting and something just didn't sound right, you might call somebody on the council that you remember making a connection with and say, what are you hearing over there?
Right.
And that would, to me, that would, if that phone call, that those, a few of those phone calls happened, half the stuff we heard about in our conversation would go away. Because there'd be that human kind of conversation about what's happening there.
Yeah.
And I don't know if this would even work. Depends on the board's or the council's relationship with their executive, but should there be some kind of something for the executives so that the executives know about each other's issues?
You meet every week then, or every other week?
With Jeff,
Yeah,
once a month, we
Once
meet
a
once a month.
That feels right. I'm just.
But that's probably just working out today's issues, right?
No, we just talk about what issues are coming up, coming up, and we also meet with Public Works quarterly. So
Okay,
we
so-
meet with quite a few of them, you know, like today, I don't know if, we had the issue out here last night.
Yeah.
And I mean, David and I were talking about that, and
Taylor caught on fire.
so, I mean,
Everybody
it's,
Everybody's okay, no injuries.
yeah, so I mean, we meet pretty regularly with a lot of the staff at the city. Public Works, wastewater, streets. Jeff and I meet, MEDP, Jeff and I, Patty, I and Jeff meet,
So maybe each body could instruct their executive to report back to them if there seems to be a problem in their relationship, so they can work on it.
I-
Does that make sense? Or
wouldn't.
you wouldn't do
That
that?
wouldn't be my recommendation.
So
I would let executive to executive. Work through those things and I wouldn't elevate it to the commission, but that's my opinion. I think the commission should be on policy.
Okay,
all
but if a policy is that we're gonna work together constructively. And there seems to be a problem, shouldn't we know about it? I mean, I understand there are landmines here, I get that.
I think that's trust. And I think if you, that, to me, that doesn't feel like something that should come before the commission. That's two executives who need to work out how they're gonna communicate or how they're gonna deal with conflict. I think
No,
it's
I
a
didn't mean on
policy
that level,
issue.
But I mean, if there's an essential policy issue, try to follow the rules here. Like the role of the commission and the council, just in general, that. Or the role of the city manager vis-a-vis commission employees. If that's coming up, shouldn't we know about it?
Commission employees, you mean
The
the,
city manager feeling that they should have control over commission employees.
Well, wouldn't it be that the two executives meet regularly? And if they've got a conflict, they try to work it out.
Oh, definitely.
And every day, each of them has the option to go to their governing body and say, I need help. And they probably are both going to try not to do that as hard as they can, because they probably don't want that much
Yeah.
help.
and here's the thing that's, I think, unique for us. We can both go to the same person, because the same person's right there.
Right. And so, I mean, to me, that you get that option every day now,
Right.
it's like,
So
and
I
you,
think
but
that's
I wouldn't say that, that we define that step.
right.
yeah, but they
Yeah.
do. And my sense is most executives, kind of the last thing they want is the board up in their business, on getting their job done.
But going back to the point, and maybe this is also something for the city to think about is, so for example, we meet regularly with Cascade Steel as our largest customer. So, there's a relationship that we have built with them that helps, understand what their issues are too, and how we can help them as a utility. And so, there might be other opportunities for the city to do the same, some types of things like that, similar to. Or to add it, or to use us, or to use the city as to bring in, those resources for each other.
I'm not sure I fully understand. I mean, in the sense that I understand that Water and Light has a very unique relationship with Cascade Steel as a business in McMinnville, but what I don't understand is, I don't even understand the suggestion in that the city, both council and executives also have very close relationships with many large partners in and around the city. So I just don't understand the suggestion.
So how does the city work with those entities? Is there a relationship there? Is there not a relationship? How do you build those relationships? Because ultimately, those relationships are going to benefit the city in having those kinds of businesses here at some point.
So John, do you mean if the city wants to talk to Cascade Steel about traffic or something like that, or something that's delicate, that they talk to you to help them with the introduction?
What I'm saying is they can, building relationships so that this Cascade Steel is comfortable going to the city manager and saying, hey, we have these issues. That
I don't think we should be messing with that. I think that's the city can decide how to allocate those resources.
I also think that doesn't not exist. For instance, Cascade Steel got a hold of me this year wanting to give the city $20,000. We took that to the executive team. We workshopped it. Where's the best, based on what Cascade Steel wanted to invest? Where's the best investment? We went back, we worked with Cascade Steel. That was great. They gave the city $20,000. We invested it into children's programming. That was really wonderful. We had heard that there might be something going on with some Cascade Steel property that was available for sale that really seemed as though it wouldn't be a benefit to the community from the city's perspective. It was I just picked up the phone and called Cascade Steel and talked to them. And we've met briefly, but also with Schnitzer Steel. And so I think that maybe that exists, but what your example almost amplifies the problem, which is that we don't have the communication so that we know what's happening within these individual organizations, right? That information sharing isn't happening, so that it might seem from your perspective that the city's out here not communicating with, our largest private employer. But we are. And then kind of to that other point that was being discussed, I have a lot of, I'm very timid around the idea of the policymaking bodies. I think, there is the direct management of performance review, goal setting with your executive, making sure that you have some kind of scorecard or whatever it is to make sure that there's check-ins and those are happening. But in terms of anything that could be even perceived as micromanaging, I think that can be a really slippery slope. And I have seen it happen here with a former mayor who attempted to micromanage or insisted on micromanaging an executive for a moment in time. And, that was inflammatory for the organization as a whole.
So it feels to me like we've kind of,
What did you do?
No, it wasn't Ed. Not this former mayor. Where were you?
We both know.
You've got a few other
You and I
guesses.
both know who you're talking.
we have consensus on the fact that Ed was a great mayor. So it feels to me like we've kind of done what we needed to do here, that you've outlined some ideas for some principles. We're all in it for the citizens of McMinnville. Mutual understanding of what each other are doing, financial systems, long-term needs of each body, what you're dealing with, understanding of emergency preparedness and risks, trying to contribute to a predictable environment, mutual understanding of the risks of each organization. What you need from the city is long-term vision of the city is clearly communicated. Understanding from the council that they understand the unique needs that the Water and Light has, regular updates on what's happening. You can help reciprocate that by making sure they have good, you are trying to understand what the city's needs are, understand the different volatility of risks and politics of the two organizations, offering regular updates, sharing onboarding resources so council members learn more about water and light, and water and light commissioners learn more about the city from the outset. So I'm seeing some general stuff here. As I said, we will have a similar conversation with the council this afternoon and ask them to make a similar list, and then we will go off in a dark hole by ourselves and try and synthesize that into a draft for you all to react to tomorrow all together. Trina, could we go to the next slide?
Before we leave that, I just want to say we can develop the most ideal structure for all of this. All it takes is one quirky personality, jerk, to upset the apple cart. So you just always got to remember, people are always going to be the problem at times. No matter how good we can make this, somebody,
You're right.
and I will say that the structure we have here, it's really all about appointing the right people, and their history and how they behave and stuff. But at the ballot, that's a whole different world, folks.
It's true.
As we look at that building down on Fifth Street, that's a big white,
So in those things, could you go back to the slide that showed the strategic questions? Yeah, the ones that Water and Light had. Is there anything missing from that list that tied to that?
Okay, yeah, keep going, Trina. This
That
one,
one,
No, keep
Oh.
going back. Keep going.
keep going,
That one,
this one,
right there.
ask your question again now that.
So we have these 4 strategic priorities for Water and Light. How do those align with that list?
Yeah, good question. So I think just to remind folks, some of the basics, we won't go through all the objectives, but organizational focus is somewhat, just to generalize a little bit, more internal focus. There's a lot of things that you are committing to working on amongst yourselves in terms of how you're organizing. I think it really materializes in the bottom 3. Stakeholder relationships. The city is a major stakeholder in the work that you're doing. Having a clear role and responsibility framework around how you're doing that work is going to be essential in terms of how you're building all your resources and maintaining or building all your infrastructure, maintaining all your resources, how you're doing emergency preparedness. The other thing, though, is that, and Commissioner Tankersley really brought it up in the virtual meeting, is your other constituency is your customers, your residents of MW&L. It's also essential that you understand how the city and the utility are engaging with those customers. The customers can be residents, but it can also be Cascade Steel. It can also be the school district, it can also be the post office. Understanding how each one of those is kind of interacting with each of the entities is going to be really important. And then certainly as you're looking at your resource needs, your financial resource needs, and your actual natural resource needs, having the city understand the complexity of what you are doing to maintain and build out the system, and the things that you talked around about BPA and the things that you talked around expansion, I think is going to be really crucial. And so, and likewise, you are not building that system or responding to those emergencies in a vacuum. You are doing it within the context of all the other, policy and political constraints and realities that the city of MW&L council and the executive and the city staff have to deal with every single day, right? And so that's, I think, how it feeds back in to the point that Commissioner Gormley made around this is people versus system. It only takes one bad person to upset the apple cart.
He didn't say bad person. He said difficult.
Difficult, sorry. This is why it's important to, as back to Commissioner Christensen around how are we actually going to either, I'm going to use the word codify, but adopt some of these things. It has to be in terms of like systems, and systems are maintained and managed by people, understandably. But that's how you keep it from kind of derailing if somebody comes in and says we don't want to do this. And so we'll consider that in terms of our our recommendations, for the conversation tomorrow.
Because when I look at those, that list, and I see like resources and infrastructure, and I come over to here, and then I see long-term needs, well, that ties directly to that item. And you can just almost take that item there and tie it to an item here.
Yeah,
Good point, John. Good point.
in fact, roles and responsibilities specifically around
Yeah.
risk preparedness was something that was called out
Mhm.
as a really important point. Thank you, John. Okay, Trina, let's go the other way.
The only other thing I would say is that we haven't talked about one document that we all worked on, and that is the Mactown 2032 work. And so I wonder if there's some opportunity to look at that document and see if we haven't exercised one of the actions, or
That's a good point.
because I think to me, that document deserves a lot of attention because it's transformative and a lot of good work has gone on and will be going on directly related to that. So there might be opportunity.
There was this moment just now that John asked us to pull up the strategic priorities here. We should do the same thing with the city's strategic plan. That's a great point.
And folks might not remember that. Ryan, you want to, why your interaction?
We played a similar role with the city of McMinnville and that created that document.
I'm still gonna hang on to that ground for the building.
I have a question about that.
Okay.
The parts that I participated in, it was only, segments. No one talked about the city being on the brink of a financial chasm. Was that discussed as part of it, or was this just ignore the money and we'll do this?
The 2032 plan?
Yeah, because it was before this came up, right?
I mean, now you're asking me to like remember a conversation that happened 4 years ago, but I feel like there was a conversation about a fiscal cliff that
Yes.
was looming, and that was a real issue that came up both in conversation with council, and also there was a leadership group for that thing that was some senior staff members, and I remember Walt Gal was on it, and there were 2 or 3 other citizen members. I remember discussing it
Yeah,
there.
I obviously wasn't part of that, but when we gave our input on whatever module we were talking about, I don't remember that being discussed at that level. It was sort of like, what do you want? It wasn't, do you want this or do you want police officers? Is my memory correct, or?
That's not what it was. It was a vision for the future.
Yeah,
Of what we wanted.
we weren't doing budgeting. We were.
Okay, great.
Vision.
Thank you. I just want to make sure that I hadn't just remembered, because like you, 4 years ago was
A long time ago, yeah. No, we were talking about what were priorities for the city.
Yes.
And we
okay.
did talk about looming issues, but we
Okay.
weren't looking at immediate term budgets at all. I mean, it's the
Okay.
2032, as it says on it.
Right, but
And it's
we
not
also
the
didn't.
city,
about-
the city capital C. Right? It's the community as a city, and the city government was a partner in that process. So several partners were identified.
No, you're right, but it wasn't.
It was a city-driven committee, though.
City.
It was appointed,
Right.
I mean,
Council document.
Council, yeah. So I mean,
Yeah.
So, I mean, I'm just. And I thought it was really worthwhile to do, but I think. It's possible there might have been some different answers if it had been known that, from what Remy says. There's not going to be money for it in 2032.
Yeah.
That's the question I have about it.
Yeah, fair point. We are gonna wrap up here. Before I invite for the mayor here to offer some closing remarks, just a reminder, everybody should have this on their calendar. That as we said, we're meeting with council a little bit later today. Tomorrow, we're meeting from 4 to 7 at the police department training room. And that's a meeting of the commission and the council. It's a joint commission.
can I just ask a question? This is like being back in grade school and making sure we put everybody in good spots. I really think we should not sit together, the 5 of us, we should be sitting with the people we're gonna work with. You know,
So,
so,
yeah.
yeah, I mean, stupid to bugger, I mean, really, we should, Tom and I should not be sitting next together, or Jody and I shouldn't be, I mean,
We often get
We'll
that.
get into trouble.
you know, good enough at kicking on the table.
Well, good point, and we'll work on this area.
And same thing for staff should be,
Police, at the police
Yeah.
department, corner of Second and Adams.
Yeah,
There's a parking slot there.
you have to be fingerprinted to go into the work, yeah, so,
Right, you can park across
yeah,
the
you
street.
fingerprinted first, fingerprint.
It's already been.
Bring a smudge right.
It's been done already.
Mayor, do you want to close this on?
Yeah, thank you. Well, I just want to
Great
say
picture of you.
that, thank you, well, it's old now, so that helps, but
Your
thanks.
mom and dad would be proud.
I just want to say that I really appreciate everybody's efforts and openness to coming into this process. I think that it would have been really easy to kind of stay stuck in where we were as opposed to how do we fix this for future generations? And I like that what we led with was our shared value. And I think that as long as we keep that at the forefront of our minds, that we will be successful as we continue moving through this process. And also just to remember that we are all doing these things, we're all serving in these roles because we do love McMinnville and we want it to be successful. We want the city, the community to thrive for generations to come and to maintain this as a wonderful, livable community. And so thank you for your participation in those efforts. And I look forward to our continued successes.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. We'll see you all tomorrow.
Andres, I have a
Okay,
question.
so I'll get this read.
You can,
Texting me later.
Trina, that's it.
Let me speak over.
I think it's funny that it's typed out this way. That says something right there.
Oh, come on, 1971.
No, and listen, I'm starting.
I mean, we put her